I stood in the courthouse lobby, my hands trembling as I clutched the folder that held 5 years of evidence. And that's when I heard it. My mother's laugh echoing off the marble walls, my father joining in, both of them so certain I was about to humiliate myself in front of a judge. They had no idea that the same legal system they'd used to control me my entire adult life was about to become their worst nightmare. But here's what I need you to understand. What made the judge's decision so devastating to them wasn't just the ruling itself. It was the one piece of evidence they never knew I had. The document that proved everything they'd told the court about me was a calculated lie. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The fluorescent lights in Judge Catherine Morrison's courtroom felt different than I'd imagined during all those sleepless nights. Colder, more clinical, the kind of lighting that doesn't let you hide anything, which I suppose was the point. I was 28 years old, and I was about to accuse my own parents of fraud, elder manipulation, and theft of my grandmother's estate in front of a circuit court judge in Davidson County, Tennessee. My lawyer, Rebecca Steinhardt, had warned me about this moment. Not the legal part, she was confident about our case. She warned me about the emotional ambush. They'll try to rattle you before we even sit down. She'd said 3 days earlier in her office on Commerce Street. Your parents know you. They know exactly which buttons to push. She was right. I'd arrived at the courthouse at 8:15 for our 9 o'clock hearing, giving myself what I thought was plenty of buffer time. The Davidson County Courthouse is one of those imposing limestone buildings that makes you feel small the moment you walk through the metal detectors. I'd been there twice before for preliminary hearings, but this was different. This was the evidentiary hearing where Judge Morrison would decide whether my case had enough merit to proceed to a full trial. I found a bench in the lobby outside Courtroom 5C and sat down, trying to review my notes one more time. My grandmother's financial records, the timeline of her cognitive decline, the suspicious power of attorney documents that appeared 2 weeks before she died, the wire transfers that emptied her accounts. Everything was in the folder on my lap, organized with colored tabs that Rebecca had insisted would make me look prepared and credible. That's when I heard my mother's voice. Well, look who actually showed up. I told your father you'd probably chicken out at the last minute. I looked up. Margaret and Donald Carver stood 15 feet away, near the drinking fountain. My mother wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her silver hair styled in that perfect bob she maintained with religious devotion. My father stood beside her in his courtroom uniform, gray suit, red tie, the outfit he'd worn to every important occasion in my life. From my high school graduation to my college dropout conversation to my grandmother's funeral, they weren't alone. My older brother, Tyler, stood slightly behind them, and next to him was someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with a leather briefcase and an expression that screamed expensive attorneys. Margaret, Donald. I'd stopped calling them Mom and Dad 6 months ago, right around the time I'd hired Rebecca and filed the lawsuit. It felt important to establish distance, to remind myself that parents don't do what they'd done. My mother's smile was the same one she'd used my entire childhood when she was about to deliver a criticism disguised as concern. Honey, it's not too late to drop this ridiculous case. We can go to breakfast, talk this through like a family. Judge Morrison is going to see right through whatever lies your lawyer has cooked up. They're not lies. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Grandma Rose left that money to me. You know she did. I have her original will. You have a piece of paper that a confused, dying woman scribbled on. My father's voice had that CEO authority he'd perfected over 30 years running Carver Industries. What you don't have is standing, legal precedent, or any proof that your grandmother was of sound mind when she supposedly changed her will without telling anyone in the family. The woman with the briefcase stepped forward, extending her hand with calculated professionalism. Elena, I'm Patricia Drummond, your parents' attorney. I've reviewed your complaint, and I want you to know that while I understand family disputes can be emotional, what you're alleging is extremely serious. Accusations of fraud and theft against your own parents, these aren't things you can just walk back after a judge dismisses your case. I didn't shake her hand. Then it's good that I have evidence. Tyler finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying that particular tone of disappointment he'd mastered. "Lainey, this is crazy. You really think Mom and Dad stole from Grandma? The same people who paid your rent for 2 years after you dropped out of college? Who bailed you out when you totaled your car? Who supported you through every failed business idea and bad relationship? That's what they'd done, systematically, for the past 6 years. Every time I'd struggled, they'd been there with a check and a reminder that I needed them. Every time I'd tried to stand on my own, there'd been some crisis, usually one they'd engineered, that proved I wasn't capable of managing my own life. When Grandma Rose had gotten sick, they'd made sure I was too financially dependent and emotionally exhausted to question what was happening to her estate. But they'd made one mistake. One critical, arrogant mistake that was about to destroy their entire strategy. "The difference," I said, looking directly at my mother, "is that Grandma Rose's money was actually mine. She told me it was mine. She wrote it down. And unlike every dollar you've held over my head, I earned her trust without manipulation." My mother's expression shifted just for a second, a crack in the careful facade. It was the look she got when something didn't go according to script. "You always were so dramatic, Elena. Making up stories, imagining slights that never happened. Doctor Phillips warned us this might happen, that your issues with reality testing could manifest in delusional accusations. Dr. Phillips, the therapist they'd sent me to when I was 23, after my second failed attempt to move out of state. The one who diagnosed me with adjustment disorder and recommended I stay close to family support systems. The one whose notes they'd probably subpoenaed to use against me in this hearing. Miss Jones?" Rebecca appeared at my elbow, her presence like a shield. "We should head in. Judge Morrison's clerk just opened the courtroom." I stood, gathering my folder, and that's when my father delivered his final pre-hearing blow. "You know what the sad thing is, Elena?" He shook his head with practiced sorrow. "Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see you like this. Making these accusations, tearing the family apart over money you didn't earn and don't deserve. She loved you, but she trusted us to make the right decisions for her estate. She knew you weren't ready for that kind of responsibility." The words hit exactly where he'd aimed them, the soft place in my heart where guilt and grief lived together. Grandma Rose had been the only person in my family who'd believed in me unconditionally, who'd listened to my dreams without immediately cataloging their impracticalities, who'd looked at me like I was capable instead of deficient. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the scattered 23-year-old who believed her parents' version of reality. I'd spent 2 years putting pieces together, following paper trails, finding witnesses, building a case that even my self-doubt couldn't undermine. "You're right about one thing," I said, meeting my father's eyes. "Grandma would be heartbroken, but not about me." I followed Rebecca into courtroom 5C, and as the heavy wooden door closed behind us, I heard my mother's voice one last time, pitched just loud enough for me to hear. "This is going to be embarrassing for her." I almost feel sorry for what's about to happen. She had no idea how right she was, just not in the way she imagined. Judge Morrison's courtroom was smaller than it looked on TV legal dramas. The judge's bench dominated the front of the room, dark wood and authority, with the Tennessee state seal mounted on the wall behind it. 2 tables faced the bench, plaintiff on the left, defendant on the right. A court reporter sat positioned between them, her stenography machine ready. Rebecca guided me to our table and began unpacking her briefcase with efficient precision. Documents in neat stacks, labeled exhibits, a yellow legal pad covered in her meticulous handwriting. Everything about her said, "We came prepared." My parents settled at the defendant's table with Patricia Drummond and Tyler. They looked comfortable, confident, like people who'd never doubted they'd win. My mother even smiled at someone in the gallery, probably a family friend they'd brought for moral support and social leverage. All rise. The Circuit Court of Davidson County is now in session, the Honorable Catherine Morrison presiding. We stood as Judge Morrison entered. She was in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She'd been a family court judge for 12 years before her appointment to Circuit Court, and Rebecca had described her as, "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. Fair but no nonsense, she hates liars and loves. Documentation. Please be seated. Judge Morrison settled into her chair and pulled a file toward her. We're here for case number 2024CV3847, Elena Marie Jones versus Margaret Ann Carver and Donald James Carver. This is an evidentiary hearing to determine whether the plaintiff's claims warrant proceeding to trial. She looked up, her gaze moving between both tables. Counselors, I've reviewed the pleadings. Miss Steinhardt, this is your motion. You may present your opening statement. Rebecca stood, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The moment when everything I'd discovered, everything I'd fought for, would either be validated or dismissed. Thank you, Your Honor, Rebecca began. This case is about a grandmother who loved her granddaughter enough to secure her future, and parents who loved money enough to steal it. Rebecca's opening statement cut through the courtroom like a scalpel through silk. Your Honor, the defendants will argue that Rose, Catherine Brennan, was a confused elderly woman when she expressed her wishes to leave her estate to her granddaughter. They'll produce medical records showing dementia. They'll present testimony about her declining memory. They'll paint a picture of a vulnerable woman who needed protection from her own poor judgment. Rebecca paused, letting the expected defense strategy hang in the air. What they won't tell you is that Rose Brennan had moments of absolute clarity, that she kept meticulous journals, that she visited 3 different attorneys in the final year of her life, each time asking the same question: how could she protect her granddaughter's inheritance from her own children? I watched Patricia Drummond's pen stop mid-note. That was new information Rebecca had deliberately kept out of our preliminary filings. The evidence will show that Margaret and Donald Carver systematically isolated Rose Brennan from her granddaughter during the final 6 months of her life. They monitored her phone calls. They intercepted her mail. They convinced her regular attorney, Martin Schwartz, to refuse her calls by suggesting she was experiencing paranoid delusions. And when Rose found a way around their barriers when she managed to update her will with a different attorney, the defendants made that document disappear within 48 hours of her death. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Slightly. Miss Steinhardt, you're alleging document destruction? Yes, Your Honor. We have testimony from a paralegal at Hendricks & Associates who witnessed Donald Carver entering their office file room unsupervised on March 8, 2 days after Rose Brennan's death. That same day, Rose's client file was discovered to be incomplete, missing the will she'd signed just 3 weeks earlier. My father's jaw tightened. I saw it even from across the room. It was the tell he had when something genuinely surprised him, when his careful planning had missed something, Rebecca continued, building momentum. But the defendants made one critical error. Rose Brennan didn't trust easily, especially not after she realized her own children were positioning themselves to control her money. So she made copies. She gave one to Elena. She gave one to her longtime friend, Judith Morales. And she gave one to her pastor, Reverend Thomas Chen of Westlake Community Church, with explicit instructions that, if anything happened to the original will at Hendricks & Associates, Reverend Chen was to deliver his copy directly to Elena. I felt the shift in the room. The gallery behind me, mostly empty except for my parents' friends, suddenly felt heavier with attention. Judge Morrison was writing notes, her expression unreadable but focused. Your Honor, we're prepared to present the authenticated will. Testimony from 3 witnesses who heard Rose Brennan's explicit wishes. Financial records showing suspicious transfers from Rose's accounts to accounts controlled by the defendants, and evidence of a coordinated effort to discredit Elena Jones's mental stability in order to challenge any inheritance claim she might make. Rebecca sat down, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. She'd laid it all out, every piece of ammunition we had, and she'd done it in a way that made my parents look exactly like what they were: calculated, methodical thieves who'd stolen from a dying woman. Patricia Drummond rose slowly, arranging her papers with deliberate calm. She was good, I could tell by the way she moved, the way she projected absolute confidence even after Rebecca's bombshell opening. Your Honor, what we have here is a tragic case of family dysfunction being weaponized through the court system. Rose Brennan did have dementia, advanced dementia, diagnosed by 3 separate neurologists. The medical records are indisputable. She pulled a document from her stack. This is a cognitive assessment from Dr. Alan Westfield, conducted 6 months, before Mrs. Brennan's death. Rose scored 11 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination. She couldn't remember what year it was. She couldn't draw a clock. She thought her deceased husband was still alive and asked for him repeatedly. Patricia's voice softened, taking on a tone of sympathetic regret. Elena Jones loved her grandmother. No one disputes that. But love doesn't give you the right to exploit a vulnerable person's confusion for financial gain. The will that Miss Steinhardt references was signed during a period when Rose Brennan lacked testamentary capacity. Any first-year law student knows that a will signed by someone who doesn't understand what they're signing is invalid. She turned slightly, gesturing toward my parents without looking at them. Margaret and Donald Carver are grieving the loss of Margaret's mother. They handled Rose's affairs with the power of attorney she'd granted them years earlier, when she was still fully competent. They made the difficult decisions that come with end-of-life care. They paid for round-the-clock nursing care out of their own pocket when Medicare wouldn't cover it. And now they're being accused of theft by a daughter who, frankly, has a documented history of financial instability and conflict with her parents. There it was. The character assassination I'd been expecting. Patricia was building the narrative they'd prepared. The unstable daughter versus the responsible parents. We'll present evidence showing that Elena Jones dropped out of college after 2 years, accumulating significant debt. That she's had 7 different jobs in the past 5 years, none lasting more than 8 months. That she's been financially dependent on her parents for most of her adult life. And that when Rose Brennan died and Elena realized she wasn't mentioned in the legitimate will, the one Rose signed 3 years ago, when she was still competent, Elena manufactured this entire story to get money she was never entitled to. Patricia sat down with the satisfied air of someone who'd just defused a bomb. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked at both tables. I'm going to hear testimony today, and I'll make my determination based on evidence, not rhetoric. Miss Steinhardt, call your first witness. The plaintiff calls Judith Morales, Your Honor. A woman in her early 70s rose from the gallery. She had white hair cut short and wore a simple gray dress with a cardigan. Judith had been my grandmother's best friend since they'd worked together at the public library in the 1982nd. I'd interviewed her 4 months ago, and what she'd told me had been the first real breakthrough in understanding what my parents had done. The bailiff swore her in, and Judith settled into the witness chair with the careful posture of someone who understood the seriousness of her role. Rebecca approached with a warm smile. Miss Morales, how long have you known Rose Brennan? 42 years. We met when we both started working at the Davidson County Library System in 1982. She was my closest friend. Did you see her regularly in the final year of her life? Judith's expression clouded. I tried to. Rose and I usually had lunch every Tuesday at the corner cafe on West End Avenue. We'd been doing it for decades. But starting in September of last year, Margaret, that's Rose's daughter, started telling me that Rose was too tired for visitors, that the dementia was making her anxious around people. I'd call, and Margaret would say Rose was sleeping or having a bad day. Did you eventually see Rose again? Yes. In February, about a month before she died. I ran into her at the grocery store on a Thursday afternoon. She was with a nurse, not Margaret. The nurse stepped away to get something from another aisle, and Rose grabbed my arm. She looked frightened. Objection, Patricia called out. Hearsay. Whatever Rose Brennan allegedly said cannot be used to prove the truth of the matter. Judge Morrison nodded, sustained as to the content of the statement. Miss Steinhardt, you know better. Rebecca didn't miss a beat. Miss Morales, I'm not asking you what Rose said. I'm asking about her actions. What did Rose do when she saw you at the grocery store? She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and shoved it into my coat pocket. Then she put her finger to her lips like shh and turned away just as the nurse came back. She didn't want the nurse to see what she'd done. What was on the paper? Judith's eyes filled with tears. It was a note in Rose's handwriting. Shaky, but definitely hers. It said, "They're stealing everything. I changed my will. Make sure Elena gets my letter." And then it had an address, the law office on Charlotte Avenue, where she'd gone to update her will. Objection. Patricia was on her feet. This alleged note is conveniently not being presented as evidence. And again, we're getting into hearsay territory. Rebecca turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have the original note. It's marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 7. I was establishing a foundation through witness testimony. I'll allow it. Continue, Miss Steinhardt. Rebecca walked back to our table and retrieved a plastic sleeve containing a small piece of paper covered in wobbly handwriting. She showed it to Judith first. Is this the note Rose gave you? Yes. Rebecca handed it to Judge Morrison, who examined it carefully, then passed it to Patricia for review. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the paper, and I saw her face go pale. She recognized her mother's handwriting. She knew it was real. Miss Morales, what did you do with this note? I went to that law office the next day. I spoke with an attorney named Lisa Nguyen. She confirmed that Rose had been there, that she'd updated her will to leave everything to Elena. Lisa gave me a sealed envelope that Rose had left with her, addressed to Elena. I kept it safe until Rose died, and then I gave it to Elena, just like Rose wanted. Rebecca, let that sit for a moment. Did you tell Margaret or Donald about the note or the envelope? No. Rose's note made it clear she didn't trust them. I honored her wishes. No further questions, Your Honor. Patricia Drummond approached Judith with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Miss Morales, you testified that Rose Brennan had dementia, correct? She had some memory problems, yes. And people with dementia can be paranoid, can't they? They can imagine threats that don't exist? Judith's back straightened. Rose wasn't paranoid. She was scared. There's a difference. But you're not a doctor, are you? You're not qualified to diagnose whether someone's fears are based in reality or are symptoms of cognitive decline. I knew Rose for 42 years. I knew when she was herself. Patricia's smile grew sharper. Even when herself included not remembering what year it was, not recognizing her own grandchildren sometimes, asking for her dead husband. Judith hesitated, and I felt my stomach drop. Patricia had found the weak point. Rose had good days and bad days, Judith said quietly. That day at the grocery store was a good day. Or, Patricia countered, it was a day when a confused, frightened woman handed you a note reflecting her paranoid delusions. And you interpreted it as reality because you wanted to believe your friend was still the person she used to be. Objection, Rebecca said. Argumentative. Sustained. Miss Drummond, ask questions, don't make speeches. Patricia nodded. No further questions. As Judith stepped down from the witness stand, she looked at me with an expression of apology, as if she'd failed somehow. I tried to smile at her, to let her know she'd done everything right, but my face felt frozen. Judge Morrison glanced at the clock. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, Miss Steinhardt, I assume you have additional witnesses? Yes, Your Honor. We call Reverend Thomas Chen. The judge nodded and stood. 15 minutes. As everyone began gathering their things, my mother leaned across the aisle, her voice low enough that only I could hear. That envelope Judith mentioned? The one from Grandma? I assume you've already shown it to your lawyer? I met her eyes and said nothing. She smiled. Of course you have. And I'm guessing it's just more confused, rambling from a sick woman. The judge is going to see right through this, Elena. You should have listened to us and dropped this case when you had the chance. But here's what my mother didn't know. I hadn't shown Rebecca the envelope yet. I'd been saving it. Because what was inside wasn't just a letter from my grandmother. It was something my parents could never explain away, never dismiss as the confusion of dementia. It was a recording. And on that recording, my grandmother's voice was crystal clear. Reverend Thomas Chen carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of listening to confessions, mediating family disputes, and sitting with people during their worst moments. He was in his late 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a professorial air. As he took the witness stand, I noticed my father shift uncomfortably in his seat. Rebecca stood. Reverend Chen, please tell the court about your relationship with Rose Brennan. Rose was a member of Westlake Community Church for 18 years. I became the senior pastor there 12 years ago, and Rose and I developed a close pastoral relationship. She volunteered in our food pantry, sang in the choir until her health declined, and we met monthly for what she called her spiritual check-ins. Did those meetings continue during the final year of her life? Reverend Chen's expression grew somber. They did, though they became more difficult to arrange. Starting around August of last year, Rose's daughter, Margaret, began attending these meetings with her. Margaret would explain that Rose needed supervision, that she got confused and upset when left alone. At first, I accepted this as a daughter's care for her aging mother. At first? Rebecca prompted. In January, Rose called me directly. She asked if I could visit her at home when Margaret wasn't there. She said it was urgent, a matter of conscience. He paused, adjusting his glasses. I arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Rose's nurse, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, let me in. Margaret was at a junior league meeting, Rose told me. We had maybe an hour. Judge Morrison was taking notes, her pen moving steadily across the page. What did Rose tell you during that visit? She said she was dying. She'd known for months but hadn't told her children because she was afraid they'd use it as an excuse to take control of everything faster than they already were. She told me that Margaret and Donald had been transferring money from her accounts, that they'd convinced her to sign papers she didn't fully understand, and that she was terrified Elena would end up with nothing. Patricia stood. Objection, Your Honor. This is classic hearsay. Your Honor, Rebecca countered. I'm not offering this testimony to prove that Margaret and Donald actually did these things. I'm offering it to show Rose Brennan's state of mind, her concerns, and why she took the actions she did. State of mind is an exception to hearsay. Judge Morrison considered this. I'll allow it, but I'm noting the objection for the record. Continue, Reverend Chen. Rose asked me to keep something safe for her. She gave me a manila envelope, sealed with tape, with Elena's name written on the front. She made me promise that if anything happened to her will, if it disappeared or if there was any question about her wishes, I would personally deliver this envelope to Elena. She said it contained proof of everything. Did you ask what was inside? I did. Rose said it was better if I didn't know the details, but that it would protect Elena from being manipulated the same way Rose had been manipulated. Rebecca walked to our table and retrieved another plastic sleeve. This one containing a manila envelope. Is this the envelope Rose gave you? Reverend Chen leaned forward, examining it. Yes. That's my handwriting on the back, noting the date I received it, January 24th. And did you deliver it to Elena? I did. After Rose's funeral, Elena approached me. She asked if I knew anything about her grandmother's wishes, because she'd heard that Rose had tried to leave her something but the will couldn't be found. I remembered my promise to Rose and gave her the envelope that same day. Rebecca turned to Judge Morrison. Your Honor, the contents of this envelope are central to our case. Before we proceed, I'd like to enter the envelope itself as Plaintiff's Exhibit 9. Any objection, Miss Drummond? Patricia stood slowly. Your Honor, we'd like to examine the envelope first and understand what's allegedly inside before it's admitted into evidence. That's reasonable. We'll take a brief recess while counsel examines the exhibit. 15 minutes. The courtroom emptied into the hallway. Rebecca pulled me aside near the water fountain, her voice low. This is it. Once we play that recording, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain the audio is clear enough? I'd listened to it 17 times since Reverend Chen had given me the envelope. I'd had it analyzed by an audio forensics expert Rebecca had recommended. I knew every word, every pause, every moment when my grandmother's voice wavered with emotion or hardened with determination. It's perfect, I said. She recorded it on her phone, the one Margaret thought she'd lost in November but that Rose had actually hidden in her closet. The audio quality is better than most courtroom recordings. Rebecca nodded. Patricia's going to fight. This. She'll argue it's been tampered with, that Rose was coerced or confused when she made it. Be prepared for that. I know. What I wasn't prepared for was my brother Tyler appearing beside me, his face pale and drawn. Lainey, can we talk? Just for a minute? Rebecca gave me a questioning look. I nodded. It's fine. Give us a second. We walked to a quieter corner of the hallway, near the windows overlooking the parking garage. Tyler shoved his hands in his pockets, not meeting my eyes. I didn't know, he said finally. About the recording, about Reverend Chen, about any of it. Didn't know, or didn't want to know. He flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? You've been standing with them this whole time, Tyler. You sat at their table. You watched them try to destroy my credibility, and you said nothing. They're our parents. His voice cracked slightly. I thought I believed them when they said Grandma was confused, that you were making all of this up because you needed money. They showed me your credit card statements, Lainey, your eviction notice from that apartment in Green Hills. They made it look like you were desperate. I was desperate. Because they made sure I stayed desperate. Every time I got close to being stable, something happened. A car accident that wasn't my fault but cost me my savings. A job that suddenly eliminated my position. A landlord who decided not to renew my lease. I didn't see the pattern until Grandma died and I started asking questions. Tyler finally looked at me. What's on the recording? The truth. Everything they did. In Grandma's own words? I watched his face carefully. Are you going to warn them? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes, loyalty to our parents versus whatever moral compass he still possessed. Finally, he shook his head. No. If Grandma wanted you to have it, if she went to that much trouble to protect you, then you deserve to be heard. Tyler. But don't ask me to testify against them. Elena, I can't do that. I'll stay quiet. But I can't actively help you destroy our family. They destroyed our family when they decided Grandma's money was more important than her wishes. The bailiff called from the courtroom door. Court's resuming in 2 minutes. Tyler walked away without another word, but he didn't return to our parents' table. He took a seat in the gallery instead, as far from both sides as he could get. It wasn't supported, but it wasn't opposition either. It was the most I could hope for. Back in the courtroom, Patricia Drummond was on her feet before Judge Morrison had fully settled into her chair. Your Honor, the defense strenuously objects to the admission of this recording. We've had only minutes to review it, and there are serious questions about its authenticity, the circumstances under which it was made, and whether Rose Brennan had the mental capacity to make reliable statements at the time of recording. Rebecca was ready. Your Honor, we have a forensic analysis from Dr. Raymond Keller, a certified audio forensics expert with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. He examined the file metadata, the audio signatures, and can testify that the recording is authentic, unaltered, and was created on Rose Brennan's iPhone on January 18th of this year. We also have testimony from Carmen Rodriguez, Rose's nurse, who was present when Rose made the recording and can verify her mental state at the time. Judge Morrison looked between the two attorneys. End quote. I'm going to allow preliminary testimony about the recording's authenticity. If I'm satisfied it meets evidentiary standards, we'll play it for the court. Miss Steinhardt, call your expert witness. Dr. Raymond Keller was everything you'd want in an expert witness. Credentials that filled 2 pages, testimony experience in dozens of high-profile cases, and an ability to explain technical concepts in language a jury could understand. He walked the judge through his analysis, methodically file, creation date, device information, spectral analysis showing no signs of editing or splicing, voice comparison to known samples of Rose Brennan's speech. Patricia's cross-examination tried to poke holes in his methodology, but Dr. Keller was unshakable. He'd done this work for 20 years. He knew his analysis would hold up. Next came Carmen Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the exhausted look of someone who worked double shifts regularly. She testified that she'd been Rose's primary caregiver during the final 3 months of her life, hired through an agency and paid directly by Margaret and Donald. Can you describe Rose's mental state on January 18th? Rebecca asked. Carmen smiled slightly, as if remembering something bittersweet. That was one of her crystal days, that's what I called them. Days when the fog lifted and Rose was completely herself. She woke up that morning and knew exactly where she was, what day it was, what had happened the day before. She asked me for her phone, the one she'd hidden. She said she needed to make a recording because she might not get another clear day. Did you help her make the recording? I held the phone steady because her hands shook. But the words were all hers. She was completely lucid, completely aware of what she was saying and why. Did she tell you what she was recording? She said it was the truth about her children. She said Elena needed to know that none of this was Elena's fault, that Margaret and Donald had been planning this for years. Carmen's voice wavered. Rose cried while she recorded it. She said it was the hardest thing she'd ever had to do, admitting what her own children had become. Patricia's cross-examination focused on dementia, the bad days, the medical records showing cognitive decline, but Carmen held firm. January 18th had been a good day, maybe Rose's last truly clear day, before the final decline began. Judge Morrison removed her reading glasses. I'm satisfied that the recording meets authentication standards. Miss Steinhardt, you may play it for the court. Rebecca connected her laptop to the courtroom's sound system. The room fell completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom. Then my grandmother's voice filled the space, trembling but determined. My name is Rose Catherine Brennan. Today is January 18th, and I'm recording this because I'm afraid I'm running out of time. If you're hearing this, Elena, it means I'm gone. And it means Margaret and Donald have done exactly what I feared they would do. I watched my mother's face drain of color. My father sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. I need you to know the truth, baby girl. I need you to understand that everything they've told you about yourself, that you're irresponsible, that you're not capable, that you need them, it's all lies. They've been stealing from me for 3 years. I didn't want to believe it at first. They're my children, but I started noticing things. Money missing from accounts, papers I didn't remember signing. And when I asked questions, they told me I was confused, that my memory was playing tricks on me. Rose's voice broke, and I heard her take a shaky breath on the recording. I changed my will. I went to a lawyer Margaret doesn't know about, and I made sure everything goes to you. The house, the savings, the trust fund your grandfather set up, all of it. Because you're the only one who loved me without calculating what I was worth. You're the only one who visited because you wanted to see me, not because you wanted to check on your inheritance. There was a pause, and when Rose spoke again, her voice was harder, angrier. Margaret and Donald think I don't know what they've done. They think I'm too far gone to understand. But I know they've transferred $230,000 from my accounts to theirs. I know they forged my signature on documents giving them control of my investment portfolio. I know they've told everyone I'm incompetent so no one will believe me if I try to fight back. In the courtroom, my mother had her hand over her mouth. My father stared straight ahead, his face a mask of controlled rage. Elena, my sweet girl, don't let them take this from you. Don't let them convince you that you don't deserve it. You do. You deserve every penny, every kindness, every chance at the life you want to build. And I'm so sorry I didn't protect you better while I was alive. I'm so sorry I let them damage you the way they damaged me. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Morrison's voice, when she finally spoke, was carefully neutral. We'll take our lunch recess. 1 hour. When we return, I'll hear closing arguments. As the courtroom emptied, I stayed in my seat, my hands trembling. Rebecca put her hand on my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. You got the truth on record. But across the aisle, my mother was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not dismissal, but something that looked almost like fear. She finally understood what I'd known all along. This wasn't just about money. This was about justice. The courthouse cafeteria smelled like burned coffee and institutional disinfectant. Rebecca and I sat at a corner table, 2 untouched sandwiches between us. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my grandmother's voice from that recording, the way it had broken when she'd apologized for not protecting me better. They're going to come at you hard in closing, Rebecca said, sipping her coffee. Patricia's too good to just roll over. She'll argue that the recording proves Rose was paranoid, that she made it during a temporary moment of clarity, surrounded by months of confusion. She'll say the specific dollar amount Rose mentioned doesn't match actual transfers, that Rose's memory was playing tricks on her even in that moment. But we have the bank records. The transfers match almost exactly. I know. But Patricia will argue that ordinary financial management isn't theft, that your parents had power of attorney, that they were paying Rose's medical bills and managing her assets responsibly. She'll reframe everything as dutiful children caring for an aging parent who doesn't understand her own finances anymore. I pushed my sandwich away. It won't work. You heard that recording. Everyone heard it. There's no way the judge can listen to Grandma's voice and think my parents are innocent. Rebecca's expression was sympathetic but realistic. Elena, judges hear heartbreaking testimony every day. Morrison's job isn't to rule based on emotion, it's to rule based on law. We've built a strong case, but Patricia's going to create reasonable doubt about every piece of evidence we've presented. That's her job. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Asterisk. Meet me in the parking garage. Level 3. It's Tyler. Asterisk. I showed Rebecca. She frowned. Be careful. Could be a setup. It's my brother. Your brother who's been sitting with your parents' legal team all morning. Just be smart about this. I found Tyler leaning against a concrete pillar on the 3rd level, far from any security cameras or other people. He looked worse than he had earlier, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. They want to settle, he said without preamble. I stopped walking. What? Dad pulled me aside during recess. He said they're willing to offer you $300,000 to drop the case. Clean break, no admission of wrongdoing. You sign an NDA, never speak about this publicly, and everyone moves on. $300,000. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having. It would pay off my debts, give me a cushion, let me start over somewhere far from Nashville and my parents' orbit. It was also roughly half of what my grandmother's estate was actually worth. And if I say no? Tyler's laugh was bitter. Then Dad's exact words were, "We'll bury her." He's got a whole file of evidence-ready medical records from when you had that breakdown in college. Documentation of every loan they've given you, testimony from Dr. Phillips about your adjustment disorder. Patricia's going to paint you as an unstable, financially desperate woman who's exploiting her dead grandmother's memory for money. That's exactly what they're doing to Grandma. I know. Tyler's voice cracked. I listened to that recording, Lainey. I heard what Grandma said about the $230,000. I went through Dad's home office last year when I was house-sitting. I saw account statements with transfers that matched those amounts. I didn't want to believe it then, so I convinced myself there was some explanation, some reason that made sense. What changed? Hearing Grandma's voice, hearing how scared she was, how betrayed she felt. He looked at me directly for the first time. I need you to know that I didn't take any of it. The money they stole, I didn't benefit from it. I have my own career, my own money. I didn't need theirs, but you knew, I suspected. That's not the same thing, and I know it's not good enough, but I never actively helped them steal from Grandma. I looked the other way. I let myself be convinced that you were the problem, that your relationship with Mom and Dad was toxic because of something you'd done, not something they were doing to you. The anger I'd been carrying for months surged up. You let them destroy my reputation, Tyler. You sat there while they called me unstable and irresponsible. You backed them up every time I tried to tell someone what was really happening. You're right, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm here now, telling you what they're planning, giving you a chance to prepare for it. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is a copy of the settlement offer. It expires at 5 o'clock today. If you don't take it, Patricia's going to spend her closing argument destroying you. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Are you testifying for them? No. I told Dad I wouldn't. He said that made me a traitor, that I was choosing you over my own parents. Tyler's smile was sad. I told him I was choosing the truth over lies. He didn't take it well. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I can't keep pretending everything they do is justified just because they're family. He pushed off from the pillar. Think about the settlement, Lainey. $300,000. No more fighting, no more lawyers, no more having your entire life dissected in court. Sometimes winning means knowing when to walk away. He left me, standing there, holding an envelope that represented everything my parents thought I was worth and everything they thought would make me go away quietly. I opened it in the elevator back up to the courthouse. The settlement document was professionally drafted, full of legal language about mutual releases and confidentiality provisions. Attached was a personal note in my father's handwriting. Asterisk. Elena, this isn't about right or wrong anymore. It's about family. Take this money, build the life you say you want, and let us all move forward. Your mother and I never wanted this to become public. We never wanted to hurt you. But if you force us to continue, we'll have no choice but to present evidence that will be embarrassing for everyone. Don't make us do that. Accept that your grandmother wasn't herself at the end, that the recording you played was the product of disease and confusion, and let this be over. We're still your parents. That has to mean something. Asterisk, I read it 3 times, looking for any hint of actual remorse or acknowledgement of what they'd done. There was none. Just strategic manipulation dressed up as parental concern, wrapped in a threat. Rebecca was waiting outside the courtroom when I returned. I handed her the envelope without a word. She scanned it quickly, her expression darkening. They're scared. This offer means they know they're losing. Or they know Patricia's about to obliterate me in closing arguments, and they're offering me a way out before that happens. Do you want to take it? I thought about my grandmother, hiding a phone in her closet so she could record the truth. I thought about her voice on that recording, apologizing for not protecting me better. I thought about all the times my parents had given me money with strings attached, help that came with conditions, love that required me to stay small and manageable. No, I want Judge Morrison to rule. I want the truth on the record, officially, where they can't spin it, or hide it or make it disappear. Even if I lose. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder. Then let's finish this. Judge Morrison returned to the bench at exactly 1 o'clock. The courtroom felt different now, charged with the weight of what had been revealed. The gallery had more people in it. Word had apparently spread during lunch that something significant was happening in courtroom 5C. Miss Drummond, Judge Morrison said, your closing argument. Patricia Drummond stood and buttoned her suit jacket with the precision of someone preparing for battle. She'd had an hour to recalibrate her strategy, and I could see she'd used it well. Your Honor, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that recording wasn't difficult to hear. It was. Rose Brennan's fear and confusion are palpable, and my clients are devastated that their mother experienced those feelings in her final months. But feelings aren't facts. Fear isn't proof. And a recording made by a woman with documented, advanced dementia cannot be the basis for finding fraud and theft. She walked toward the center of the courtroom, commanding attention. Let's talk about what we actually know, based on evidence, not emotion. Rose Brennan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease 14 months before her death. The medical records are unambiguous. She had good days and bad days, yes, but the trajectory was clear progressive cognitive decline that affected her memory, her judgment, and her ability to accurately assess reality. Dr. Carmen Rodriguez, Elena's own witness, testified that Rose had crystal days. But crystal days are, by definition, the exception. They're brief moments of clarity surrounded by confusion. Patricia picked up a document from her table. Rose mentioned $230,000 in that recording. She claimed her children stole that money, but the actual financial records tell a different story. Margaret and Donald Carver made multiple transfers from Rose's accounts, yes. But every single transfer was documented, was made under the authority of a valid power of attorney Rose had signed years earlier, and was used for Rose's care. Round-the-clock, nursing care that cost $18,000 per month, medication not covered by Medicare, modifications to Rose's home to make it safer for someone with dementia. These weren't theft, these were the expenses of keeping an elderly, sick woman comfortable and safe. I felt my stomach tighten. She was good. She was making it sound reasonable, necessary, even noble. Elena Jones wants you to believe her grandparents' estate planning was some elaborate conspiracy, but the reality is simpler and sadder. Rose Brennan, in her confusion, believed her children were stealing from her. This is a common delusion in dementia patients, paranoia about family members, accusations of theft that have no basis in fact. It's tragic, but it's also documented medical reality. Patricia turned to look at me directly. And then, there's Elena herself, a young woman who, by her own admission and documented history, has struggled with financial stability her entire adult life. Who dropped out of college? Who's been evicted? Who's accumulated significant debt? Who's been dependent on her parents for years? When Rose died and Elena learned she wasn't the primary beneficiary of the estate because Rose, in her moments of true clarity years earlier, had established a more traditional estate plan, Elena decided to manufacture a case. She found a sympathetic minister who remembered a sealed envelope. She found a nurse who wanted to believe her patients' lucid moments were more significant than they actually were. She found a friend who interpreted a confused woman's paranoid note as a cry for help rather than a symptom of disease. And she found a lawyer willing to turn family tragedy into litigation. Rebecca's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. Your Honor, the Carvers did nothing wrong. They cared for a dying mother with the resources she herself had given them authority to use. They made difficult medical and financial decisions that any loving child would make. And now they're being accused of crimes they didn't commit by a daughter who refuses to accept that her grandmother's estate plan didn't center on her. Patricia returned to her table. The plaintiff hasn't met her burden of proof. She's presented emotion, speculation, and the recorded fears of a woman who couldn't reliably remember what day it was. That's not evidence of fraud. That's evidence of a family in crisis, being exploited by one member who sees an opportunity in tragedy. I respectfully ask that you dismiss this case and let this family begin to heal. She sat down, and the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at Rebecca. Miss Steinhardt, you're closing. Rebecca stood slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. Your Honor, Patricia just spent 15 minutes explaining why. You shouldn't believe Rose Brennan. Why her fears were delusions. Why were her words confused and rambling? Why should a woman who raised 2 children, worked for 30 years, maintained friendships, and navigated the world independently until her final months be dismissed as incompetent and unreliable? Rebecca walked forward, carrying nothing but a single piece of paper. But here's what Patricia can't explain away. Rose Brennan knew the exact amount that had been transferred from her accounts. $230,000. That's not a confused estimate. That's not a paranoid delusion. That's a specific number, and it matches the actual transfers to within $3,000. How does a woman with dementia so severe she doesn't know what year it is remember detailed financial transactions with that level of precision? I saw Judge Morrison's pen pause over her notepad. Patricia argues that the transfers were legitimate expenses for Rose's care. But the care, costs, she cited $18,000 per month, don't appear anywhere in the financial records until after Rose expressed her intention to change her will. Before January, Rose's care costs averaged $6,000 per month. Suddenly, when Rose starts talking about protecting Elena's inheritance, the expenses triple. That's not a coincidence. That's strategy. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. And let's talk about the will that conveniently disappeared from the law office at Hendricks & Associates. Patricia didn't address that in her closing. Did you notice? She didn't explain how Donald Carver ended up alone in the file room where Rose's documents were stored. She didn't explain why Rose's complete file suddenly became incomplete. She just hoped you wouldn't notice that enormous gap in her argument. She held up the paper in her hand. This is a statement from Lisa Nguyen, the attorney at Charlotte Avenue Legal Services who drafted Rose's final will. She states that Rose was completely lucid during their meetings. That Rose understood exactly what she was doing. That Rose specifically requested extra copies because she was afraid the original might disappear. Miss Nguyen has practiced elder law for 20 years. She knows how to assess capacity. And she's willing to testify, under oath, that Rose Brennan knew exactly what she was doing when she left everything to Elena. Rebecca walked back toward our table, but she wasn't done. Patricia wants you to believe Elena manufactured this case out of desperation and greed. But desperate people don't spend 2 years building a paper trail. Greedy people don't turn down settlement offers. Elena turned down $300,000 this afternoon, more money than she's ever had because this isn't about money. It's about the truth. It's about making sure her grandmother's final wishes are honored instead of erased. She placed her hand on my shoulder. Rose Brennan spent her last clear day recording a for watching message for her granddaughter. Not rambling, not confused. Clear, specific, detailed testimony about what her children had done. And then she hid that recording where they'd never find it, gave copies of her will to people she trusted, and begged her minister to protect Elena from the same manipulation Rose had suffered. Rebecca faced Judge Morrison directly. Your Honor, this isn't a case about a confused woman making paranoid accusations. This is a case about 2 people who saw an opportunity in their mother's illness and took it. Who isolated her from her granddaughter? who manipulated her finances, who destroyed evidence, and who are now trying to use the very disease they exploited as a shield against accountability. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The plaintiff has met her burden. The evidence is clear. And Rose Brennan deserves to have her voice heard, not dismissed, not explained away, but honored. I ask that you rule in Elena's favor and ensure that Rose's final wishes are carried out as she intended. Rebecca sat down beside me, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked at both tables. I'm going to take this matter under advisement. I'll issue my ruling in writing within 2 weeks. The court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. The 2 weeks after the hearing felt like living in suspended animation. I went to work at the bookstore where I'd been employed for the past 9 months, my longest job in years, which my parents would have cited as proof of newfound maturity if they weren't currently suing me. I restocked shelves, helped customers find obscure poetry collections, and pretended my entire future wasn't hanging on a judge's decision. Rebecca called me every few days with the same update. Nothing yet. Judge Morrison was thorough, she reminded me. A complex case like this required careful review of all the evidence, all the first testimony, all the legal precedents. 2 weeks was actually fast for a ruling of this magnitude. On day 9, something unexpected happened. I was closing the bookstore on a Thursday evening when my phone rang. Unknown number, Nashville area code. I almost didn't answer. My parents' friends had been calling sporadically, either to express concern about the terrible situation or to lecture me about respecting my elders. But something made me pick up. Elena Jones? The voice was female, older, with a slight tremor. Yes? My name is Dorothy Chen. I'm Reverend Thomas Chen's mother. He gave me your number and said I should call you. He said it was important. I locked the bookstore door and sat down on the front step. Is everything okay with Reverend Chen? Oh, he's fine, dear. But I have something you need to know about. I was Rose Brennan's neighbor for 35 years. We lived next door to each other on Hillside Drive until Rose moved to that assisted living place in her final year. My heart started beating faster. Did you know my grandmother well? We had coffee every Sunday morning for decades. Rose and I were both early risers, so we'd sit on her back porch and talk before church. Even after she got sick, I'd still come by. Margaret didn't like it, she said. Rose got agitated around visitors, but Rose always seemed happy to see me. Mrs. Chen, why are you calling? There was a pause then. Because I've been watching the news. I saw the story about your court case, about Margaret and Donald being accused of stealing from Rose. And I remembered something Rose gave me last December, about 2 months before she died. I stood up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. What did she give you? A photo album. One of those old-fashioned ones with the plastic sleeves. Rose said she wanted me to keep it safe because Margaret was throwing things away, claiming Rose didn't need clutter in her declining state. Rose got very upset about it. She said the album had pictures Margaret would destroy if she found them. What kind of pictures? I didn't look inside. Rose asked me not to, saying it wasn't my burden to carry. But she made me promise that if anything happened to her, if there was ever any question about her mental state or her wishes, I should give the album to you. She said you'd understand what it meant. My mind was racing. Mrs. Chen, do you still have it? I do. It's been sitting in my hall closet all this time. After Rose died, I forgot about it. I'm 83, dear. My memory isn't what it used to be. But when I saw your name in the paper, it all came back. I called Thomas, and he said I needed to contact you immediately. Can I come get it? Right now? She gave me her address, a house in Belmont, about 15 minutes from the bookstore. I called Rebecca on the way, driving faster than I should have. It's after business hours, Elena. Can this wait until tomorrow? No. Mrs. Chen has evidence. Something Grandma gave her. A photo album she specifically wanted me to have if there were questions about her mental state. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I'm calling Judge Morrison's clerk first thing in the morning. If this is what I think it is, we need to file a motion to reopen evidence. Don't look at it until I'm with you. Rebecca, Elena, I'm serious. If this becomes evidence in your case, we need to maintain a chain of custody. Document everything. I'm meeting you at Mrs. Chen's house in 20 minutes. Dorothy Chen's house was a small brick ranch with a garden that showed signs of decades of careful tending. She answered the door wearing a cardigan and slippers, her white hair in a neat bun. She looked exactly like someone's grandmother, which made sense given that she'd been a surrogate family to mine. Rebecca arrived moments later, carrying her leather briefcase and a notary stamp. Mrs. Chen, I'm Rebecca Steinhardt, Elena's attorney. Thank you for contacting us. Before we proceed, I need to document this exchange. Is that all right with you? Dorothy nodded and led us to her living room, where a burgundy photo album sat on the coffee table. It was one of those heavy albums from the 80s, with memories embossed in gold on the cover. Rebecca pulled out her phone and began recording. For the record, this is Rebecca Steinhardt, attorney for Elena Jones, present with Elena Jones and Dorothy Chen at Mrs. Chen's residence on November 14th. Mrs. Chen, can you state for the record when and how you came into possession of this photo album? Dorothy recounted the story she'd told me Rose bringing it over last December, asking her to keep it safe, and the promise to give it to me if questions arose about Rose's mental state. And has anyone else had access to this album since Rose gave it to you? No. It's been in my closet the entire time. Rebecca put on latex gloves. She apparently kept them in her briefcase for exactly these situations and carefully opened the album. I leaned forward, trying to see. The first page had photos from the 1,960 seconds. My grandmother as a young mother, holding a baby I recognized as my mother. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, ordinary family moments. The second page showed similar scenes from the 70s and 80s. Then we turned to the third page, and everything changed. Instead of photos, the plastic sleeves held documents, bank statements from 2022, with handwritten notes in the margins in my grandmother's distinctive cursive. Highlighted entries marked "Asked Margaret about this, she said computer error," and Donald said this was for my medication, but I don't recognize this company. Rebecca's hands were shaking slightly as she turned the pages. More documents, more notes. A letter from an attorney my grandmother had consulted, dated 18 months before her death, asking about options to revoke a power of attorney. A printed email exchange between my mother and someone at Rose's bank, where my mother claimed to need access to Rose's accounts to prevent her from making dangerous financial decisions. "Oh my God," I whispered. But the most damaging evidence was on the last pages. Photocopies of checks my grandmother had written to various charities and causes her church, the public library, a women's shelter she'd supported for years. Each check had been voided, with a stamp that said, "Account holder lacks capacity, POA override." And next to each voided check, Rose had written notes. "I wanted to donate." Margaret stopped it. "This was for the library book fund." Donald said I wasn't allowed. There were dozens of them. A paper trail of my grandmother trying to maintain control of her own money, her own choices, and being systematically blocked by her children who claimed it was for her own good. The final page had a letter in my grandmother's handwriting, dated December 20th. Her writing was shaky but legible. "Elena, my darling girl, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Dorothy kept her promise. I've been documenting everything for months. Every time Margaret or Donald takes money I don't authorize. Every time they override my decisions. Every time they tell me I'm too confused to know what I want. I wanted you to see this so you'd know I wasn't confused. I knew exactly what they were doing. I just couldn't stop them alone. Please don't let them rewrite history. Please don't let them pretend I was too far gone to know my own mind. I knew. I always knew. And I loved you enough to make sure the truth survived, even if I didn't. All my love, Grandma Rose." I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Rebecca was photographing every page, documenting every note, every voided check, every piece of evidence my grandmother had compiled while my parents thought she was too demented to understand what was happening to her. "This changes everything," Rebecca said quietly. "This isn't just he said, she said anymore. This is documentary evidence of financial control, of systematically overriding Rose's expressed wishes, of using her diagnosis as a weapon against her autonomy." Dorothy was crying softly in her chair. "I should have looked sooner. I should have given it to you right after Rose died. I forgot. I'm so sorry." I knelt beside her chair and took her hand. "You kept it safe. That's what Grandma needed. You honored your promise. Rebecca was already on her phone, calling someone. Judge Morrison's clerk. I know it's after hours, but this is urgent. We have new evidence in Jones versus Carver that was just discovered. Material evidence that directly impacts the case. Yes, I'll send a written motion first thing tomorrow, but I need to give you a heads up tonight. I sat back on the couch, holding the photo album, and realized what my grandmother had really left me. Not just money or property, but proof. Irrefutable. Documented proof that she'd been fighting back the entire time, that every fear she'd expressed in that recording was backed up by months of careful documentation. My parents thought they'd covered all their bases. They'd destroyed the will at the law office. They'd controlled access to Rose in her final months. They'd painted me as unstable and opportunistic. They'd prepared a defense built on the premise that a woman with dementia couldn't be trusted to know her own reality. But they'd forgotten one thing. My grandmother had been a librarian for 30 years. She understood the power of documentation. She knew how to organize information, preserve evidence, and create a record that would survive her. Rebecca ended her call. Judge Morrison's clerk is contacting her tonight. We're filing an emergency motion at 8 a.m. to present this album as newly discovered evidence. If the judge grants it, and I think she will, we'll be back in court by the end of the week. What does this mean for the case? It means your grandmother just testified from beyond the grave. And this time, there's no way for Patricia Drummond to claim it's the product of confusion or delusion. These are contemporaneous notes, dated documents, and financial records. This is Rose Brennan, in real time, documenting her own financial abuse. I looked down at the album in my hands, at my grandmother's careful handwriting marking every violation of her trust. She'd known she was running out of time. She'd known her memory was failing. So she'd done what any good librarian would do. She'd created a catalog of crimes, organized it for maximum impact, and hidden it where her children would never think to look. They're going to panic when they find out about this, I said. Rebecca smiled grimly. Good. Let them panic. They've spent this entire case acting like they had nothing to hide. Time to show them what happens when the truth has receipts. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler. Asterisk, Dad just called me. Said something about new evidence. Said Patricia thinks you somehow fabricated more documents. He's talking about filing for sanctions against you and Rebecca. What's going on? Asterisk, I texted back. Asterisk, Grandma kept records. Lots of records. Your parents didn't know about them. Tell them to check their voided charity checks from 2022 to 2023. Tell them Grandma wasn't as confused as they claimed. Asterisk, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, asterisk. Holy shit. Asterisk. Rebecca was repacking the photo album in a protective folder, treating it with the reverence it deserved. We need to secure this tonight. I'm taking it to our office safely. Tomorrow morning, we file the motion, serve your parents' attorney, and wait for Judge Morrison to schedule the hearing. Elena, I need you to be prepared for them to come at you hard. This album destroys their entire defense strategy. They're going to be desperate. Let them be desperate. I'm done being afraid of my own parents. But even as I said it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Because desperate people do desperate things. And my parents had already proven they were willing to destroy evidence, manipulate testimony, and sacrifice their own mother's dignity to protect themselves. The question wasn't whether they'd fight back. The question was how far they'd go. And I was about to find out. Judge Morrison granted our emergency motion within 12 hours. By Friday afternoon, we were back in courtroom 5C, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. The gallery was packed, news of newly discovered evidence had leaked, and local reporters sat in the back rows with notebooks ready. My parents looked like they hadn't slept. My mother's makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and my father's usual commanding presence had been replaced by barely controlled fury. Patricia Drummond sat between them, her expression tight as she reviewed documents. Rebecca had spent the previous evening preparing a presentation. She'd scanned every page of the photo album, organized them chronologically, and created a timeline that showed exactly when each documented incident occurred relative to Rose's medical diagnoses and my parents' legal maneuvers. Your Honor, Rebecca began once we were all assembled. The plaintiff presents newly discovered evidence that was in the possession of Dorothy Chen, a neighbor and friend of the deceased. Mrs. Chen will testify that Rose Brennan gave her this photo album in December with explicit instructions to preserve it and deliver it to Elena if questions arose about Rose's mental capacity or wishes. Judge Morrison had the album in front of her, protected in clear evidence sleeves. She'd clearly spent time reviewing it before the hearing. Miss Drummond, I've examined these documents. They appear to be contemporaneous records kept by Rose Brennan documenting financial transactions and decision-making processes. Do you dispute their authenticity? Patricia stood slowly. Your Honor, we haven't had adequate time to examine these documents or have them analyzed by forensic experts. The timing of this discovery is highly suspicious, conveniently appearing after closing arguments, when my clients can't adequately prepare a response. We believe these documents may have been altered, selectively edited, or even fabricated. That's a serious accusation, Counselor. It's a serious case, Your Honor. The plaintiff has demonstrated a willingness to present questionable evidence. Questionable evidence? Rebecca cut in. Your Honor, we have the original album with Dorothy Chen's fingerprints and DNA on it. We have her sworn testimony about receiving it. We have Rose Brennan's handwriting, which can be verified against dozens of other documents. There's nothing questionable here except the defendant's desperation. Judge Morrison held up her hand. Let's proceed methodically. Mrs. Chen, please take the stand. Dorothy Chen was sworn in again, and Rebecca walked her through the same story she'd told us, but now under oath and for the record. When Patricia cross-examined her, she tried to suggest Dorothy was confused about dates, that maybe she'd received the album earlier and forgotten, that perhaps Elena had influenced her memory. But Dorothy was unshakable. Young lady? She said to Patricia with the authority of an elderly woman who'd raised 6 children and wasn't intimidated by lawyers. I'm 83 years old. But I know what happened 6 months ago versus what happened last week. Rose gave me that album on December 12th. I remember because it was my youngest grandson's birthday, and Rose apologized for interrupting my preparations. I've kept it in my hall closet ever since, and nobody touched it until Elena and her lawyer came to my house 2 nights ago. Patricia tried a different angle. Mrs. Chen, you're Reverend Chen's mother, correct? And Reverend Chen has already testified in favor of the plaintiff. Isn't it possible your family loyalty is influencing your testimony? Dorothy's expression hardened. My son taught me to tell the truth. That's what I'm doing. Rose was my friend for 35 years. I'm honoring her final wishes, not playing sides in a family fight. When Dorothy stepped down, Rebecca presented the album contents page by page. Bank statements from March 2022 showing a transfer of $35,000 to an account Rose had circled with a note. I didn't authorize this. Margaret says it's for future care expenses, but won't tell me what that means. Another statement from June 2022, $42,000 transferred, with Rose's notation. Asked to see receipts. Donald got angry, said I don't trust him. I don't. The voided charity checks were particularly damning. Rose had been trying to donate $10,000 to the public library where she'd worked for 3 decades, a final gift to an institution she loved. The check had been voided with the lax capacity stamp, dated just 3 days after Rose had written it. Her note beside it read, I'm not allowed to give my own money away anymore. They say I'm too sick to make good decisions. But I'm not too sick to know what they're taking. I watched my mother's face as each document was displayed on the courtroom screen. She wasn't looking at the evidence. She was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between hatred and fear. Judge Morrison examined a particularly detailed entry from November 2022. Miss Steinhardt. This notation indicates Rose Brennan contacted an attorney about revoking her power of attorney. Do we have documentation of that contact? We do, Your Honor. Rebecca produced a letter from Hammond and Associates, a law firm in Franklin. This is a consultation letter confirming Rose met with attorney Michael Hammond on November 3, 2022. Mr. Hammond advised her on the process for revoking a power of attorney and recommended she undergo a cognitive evaluation to establish capacity. Rose scheduled the evaluation, but Rebecca paused meaningfully. The appointment was canceled 3 days later by Margaret Carver, who told the evaluator's office that Rose was too ill to travel. Patricia was on her feet. Your Honor, my client canceled that appointment because Rose had suffered a serious decline. She'd been found wandering outside her home at 3 a.m., confused and disoriented. Margaret was acting to protect her mother from unnecessary stress. Then why? Rebecca countered. Did Margaret not reschedule the evaluation once Rose had stabilized? Why not prove her mother lacked capacity through official channels? Unless, of course, she was afraid Rose would pass the evaluation and successfully revoke the power of attorney. The judge made a note. Continue, Miss Steinhardt. Rebecca presented more evidence. Emails between my mother and Rose's bank discussing transaction limits, calendar entries showing my parents had systematically reduced Rose's access to her own attorney, phone records indicating they'd changed Rose's phone number without telling her regular contacts, including me. It was a comprehensive picture of isolation and control, all documented in Rose's increasingly shaky but determined handwriting. Then Patricia dropped her bomb. Your Honor, the defense would like to present rebuttal evidence that we've obtained in the past 24 hours, given the plaintiff's new submissions. Judge Morrison frowned. What kind of evidence? Patricia nodded to someone in the gallery, and a man in his 50s stood up balding, wearing an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase. This is Dr. Richard Kowalski, a forensic psychiatrist who specializes in testamentary capacity evaluations. We've asked him to review all medical records, testimony, and now these newly presented documents. Rebecca was already objecting. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of presenting evidence, and the defense is introducing an expert witness who wasn't disclosed. Dr. Kowalski is not testifying about new facts, Your Honor. Patricia interrupted smoothly. He's providing expert opinion on evidence already in the record, which is permissible as rebuttal. Given that the plaintiff has introduced new evidence, surely we're entitled to have an expert analyze it. Judge Morrison considered this. I'll allow limited testimony. Dr. Kowalski, approach the bench. After a brief sidebar, Dr. Kowalski was sworn in. He had credentials that filled 3 pages, Harvard Medical School, 20 years at prestigious institutions, author of textbooks on cognitive assessment. Patricia guided him through his analysis. Dr. Kowalski, you've reviewed Rose Brennan's medical records, including MRI scans, cognitive assessments, and physician notes. What is your professional opinion about her capacity during the final year of her life? Rose Brennan had advanced Alzheimer's disease, with significant frontal lobe deterioration. Her medical records show classic symptoms: short-term memory loss, temporal disorientation, impaired judgment, and paranoid ideation. The progression was rapid and severe. In your professional opinion, would Rose have been capable of maintaining accurate records of financial transactions during this period? No. Patients at her stage of decline typically cannot track complex information like account numbers, transfer amounts, or dates with any reliability. What we often see instead is confabulation, the brain filling in memory gaps with false information that the patient believes is true. My stomach dropped. He was good. He was making it sound like every note in that album was a false memory, a confused attempt by a sick woman to make sense of a reality she could no longer accurately perceive. Patricia continued. These handwritten notes we've seen, could they represent paranoid delusions rather than factual documentation? Absolutely. Paranoia is extremely common in Alzheimer's patients. They believe family members are stealing from them, that caregivers are plotting against them, that their possessions are being taken. The specificity of Rose's notes doesn't indicate clarity, it indicates a mind trying desperately to impose order on an experience it no longer understands. Rebecca was writing furiously, preparing her cross-examination, but I could see the damage being done. Dr. Kowalski was legitimizing every dismissal, every minimization of my grandmother's experience that my parents had offered. One final question, Doctor. The recording we heard earlier in this case, Rose Brennan's voice message describing what she believed was theft, is that consistent with paranoid delusion? It's textbook paranoia. The emotional distress, the specific accusations, the belief in conspiracy against her, these are all classic presentations of dementia-related paranoia. The fact that she went to such lengths to record it and hide it actually supports the diagnosis. Paranoid patients often engage in elaborate efforts to document their delusions. Patricia thanked him and sat down, looking satisfied. Rebecca stood for cross-examination, and I could see the focused intensity in her posture that meant she was about to dismantle something. Dr. Kowalski, you mentioned that Rose couldn't have accurately tracked financial information. But you're aware that several of the amounts she documented match actual bank transfers to the dollar. I understand there are some correlations. Yes, some correlations? Rose noted a $35,000 transfer in March. Bank records show $35,000 transferred that exact month. She noted $42,000 in June. Records show $42,000. She documented 17 separate transactions, and 15 of them match actual transfers with 98% accuracy. How does a confused, paranoid patient hallucinate? Numbers that perfectly match reality? Dr. Kowalski shifted slightly. She may have had access to bank statements and copied numbers without understanding their context. Then explain this. Rebecca held up one of Rose's documented pages. This note is dated March 17th, 3 days before the bank statement for that transaction would have arrived. How did Rose document a transfer that hadn't yet appeared on her statements? I would need to review the specific timelines. You reviewed all the evidence, Doctor. That's what you testified to. So, how did a paranoid, delusional woman with severe cognitive impairment predict financial transactions before they appeared in official records? The courtroom was silent. Dr. Kowalski opened his mouth, closed it, then said carefully, "Without additional context, I cannot explain that specific discrepancy." Rebecca pressed harder. "Let's talk about paranoia. You said Rose's fears were textbook delusion, but if someone really is stealing from you, and you document it, and you hide the documentation because you're afraid they'll destroy it, is that paranoia or reasonable fear? The clinical determination would depend on whether the fear is grounded in reality. Which brings us back to the documented evidence that proves Rose's fears were grounded in reality. Doctor, isn't it true that the primary difference between paranoia and justified suspicion is whether the threat is real? In simplified terms, yes. And if the threat is real, if family members really are taking money without authorization, really are blocking access to legal counsel, really are using medical diagnoses to override the patient's autonomy, then what Rose experienced wasn't paranoia at all, was it? It was an accurate threat assessment. Dr. Kowalski's professional composure cracked slightly. You're asking me to make a legal determination about intent, which is outside my scope of expertise? No, Doctor. I'm asking you to acknowledge that a person who correctly identifies theft in progress and documents it systematically is not delusional. They're victims. Can you make that acknowledgement? Patricia objected, but the damage was done. Dr. Kowalski had been forced to admit that Rose's documentation, if accurate, indicated clear thinking rather than confused paranoia. Judge Morrison called for a recess, and as we stood, my father leaned across the aisle toward me. His voice was low, venomous. You have no idea what you've started. No idea what this is going to cost you. It already cost Grandma everything, I said quietly. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. His face flushed dark red, and for a moment I thought he might actually lose control right there in the courtroom, but Patricia's hand on his arm pulled him back. In the hallway, Rebecca was exhilarated. That cross-examination was perfect. Morrison saw exactly what I wanted her to see, that their expert can't explain away concrete evidence with clinical theories. We're winning, Elena. But as I looked back through the courtroom doors, I saw my parents huddled with Patricia and 2 other people I didn't recognize. They were planning something. I could see it in their posture, their urgent whispers, the way Patricia kept shaking her head like she was warning them against something. Tyler appeared beside me, his face grim. They're not done yet. I heard Dad on the phone this morning. He's got something else planned. Something Patricia doesn't even know about. What kind of something? I don't know. But Dad said, if she wants to destroy this family, she'll find out what that actually means. Lainey, I think you need to be careful. I think they're going to come after you directly, not just in court, Rebecca overheard. Tyler, if you have specific information about threats or intimidation, I don't have specifics, just a bad feeling. And with our parents, bad feelings usually mean something worse than you imagined. We were called back into the courtroom before I could process that warning, but as I took my seat, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My mother was smiling. Not the fake courtroom smile she'd worn all day, but a genuine, satisfied smile. The kind of smile she used to give me when she'd outmaneuvered me in some argument, when she'd proven she was smarter than me, more prepared than me. The kind of smile that meant she had an ace I didn't know about, and she was about to play it. Patricia Drummond stood with the deliberate slowness of someone about to deliver a killing blow. Your Honor, the defense has one final piece of evidence to present. We've been reluctant to introduce it because of its sensitive nature, but given the serious accusations being made against my clients, we have no choice. Rebecca tensed beside me. Judge Morrison looked wary. What evidence, Miss Drummond? Evidence that directly bears on Elena Jones's credibility and her true motivation for bringing this lawsuit. Patricia pulled a folder from her briefcase. These are psychiatric records from Vanderbilt Psychiatric Hospital, where Elena was admitted for a 72-hour involuntary hold in October 2021. My entire body went cold. I'd buried that memory so deep I sometimes convinced myself it hadn't happened. But it had. 3 years ago, after a particularly brutal fight with my parents about money I'd borrowed and couldn't repay, after days of not sleeping, after my then-boyfriend had left me, I'd called a crisis hotline and said things that scared them enough to send police to do a wellness check. I'd been taken to Vanderbilt, evaluated, and released after 3 days with a diagnosis of acute stress reaction. Rebecca was on her feet immediately. Objection! Medical records are privileged and protected under HIPAA. The defense cannot. We have a signed release, Your Honor. Patricia produced another document. Signed by Elena Jones herself in 2022, when she applied for a loan from her parents. The release granted Donald and Margaret Carver access to her medical and psychiatric records for purposes of assessing her financial stability. I remembered signing that release. My parents had insisted on it before they'd lend me money for a security deposit. They'd said it was standard, that the bank would require the same thing. I'd been desperate enough to sign without reading carefully. Judge Morrison examined the release. It appears valid. I'll allow the evidence. But Miss Drummond, I'm warning you that mental health history alone does not disqualify someone from bringing a legitimate legal claim. Of course not, Your Honor. But these records are relevant to Miss Jones's credibility and her pattern of behavior when under financial stress. Patricia began reading selected excerpts from the psychiatric evaluation. Words like paranoid ideation, feelings of persecution, family conflict centered on financial dependency, and difficulty distinguishing perceived slights from actual harm filled the courtroom. She made it sound like I was unstable, delusional, prone to imagining conspiracies where none existed. Exactly the narrative my parents had been building about me for years. The evaluation notes that Elena expressed beliefs that her parents were sabotaging her attempts at independence, that they were controlling her through financial manipulation. The attending psychiatrist noted these beliefs as potentially indicative of paranoid thinking patterns. I felt the courtroom's attention shift, felt the doubt creeping in. Even the reporters in the back were writing faster, sensing a different story emerging. But then Patricia made a mistake. She introduced a document I'd never seen before, a letter from my father to the psychiatric hospital administrator, written 3 days after my admission. In it, he expressed concern about my deteriorating mental state and requested that I remain hospitalized longer for comprehensive evaluation. He mentioned my history of making false accusations against family members and suggested I might be a danger to myself if released too quickly. Rebecca's hand shot up. Your Honor, may I examine that letter? Judge Morrison passed it over. Rebecca read it carefully, and I saw her expression change from concern to something harder, sharper. Miss Drummond, you've just introduced a letter that was never part of Elena's medical file. How did the defense obtain this? Patricia hesitated. It was provided by my client, Donald Carver, who retained a copy of correspondence he'd sent to the hospital. Did the hospital act on this letter? I don't have information about, because I do. Rebecca was already pulling documents from her own briefcase. I subpoenaed Elena's complete hospital records 3 months ago as part of standard case preparation. The hospital's response to Donald Carver's letter is in those records. Would you like to know what it says? The courtroom went completely silent. Rebecca read from the document. Quote, "We have completed our evaluation of Miss Jones and find no evidence supporting continued involuntary hospitalization. Her crisis was situational, her thinking is clear and organized, and her concerns about family dynamics, while distressing to her, do not constitute delusional thinking. We note that family members sometimes mistake justified grievances for mental illness, and we remind Mr. Carver that disagreement with parental authority is not, in itself, a psychiatric symptom. Miss Jones is being discharged as stable and competent." I watched my father's face drain of color. Rebecca wasn't finished. And here's the interesting part. The hospital's notes indicate that after receiving Donald Carver's letter, they conducted an additional interview with Elena specifically to assess whether her statements about family financial control were delusional or reality-based. The Way's evaluating psychiatrist noted, and I quote, "Patient provides specific, detailed, and internally consistent account of family financial dynamics. Concerns appear grounded in lived experience rather than paranoid interpretation. Recommend patient consider legal consultation regarding financial autonomy." Patricia tried to recover. That doesn't change the fact that Elena has a documented history of mental health crisis, a crisis her father tried to exploit and extend. Rebecca's voice was ice. A crisis that medical professionals determined was a reasonable response to actual family dysfunction. Your Honor, the defense just accidentally proved our case. They've shown that 3 years ago, hospital professionals assessed Elena's claims about her parents' financial control and found them credible, not delusional. Judge Morrison was writing rapidly. "Miss Drummond, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you know about the hospital's actual findings when you introduced these records?" Patricia's silence was enough. "Because it appears to me that you've attempted to mislead this court by presenting Elena's psychiatric admission out of context while omitting the hospital's conclusions that directly contradict your narrative." The judge's voice was sharp. "That's troubling, Counselor. Your Honor, we believed the admission itself was relevant. The admission is relevant. So are the conclusions. All of it goes in the record, not just the parts that suit your argument." Judge Morrison closed the file in front of her with deliberate finality. "Is there anything else the defense wishes to present?" Patricia looked at my parents, who were having a whispered, urgent conversation. My mother's satisfied smile had vanished, replaced by barely contained panic. Finally, Patricia shook her head. "No, Your Honor. The defense rests." "Very well. I've heard extensive testimony and reviewed substantial evidence over these proceedings. I'm prepared to issue my ruling from the bench." My heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Rebecca gripped my hand under the table. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked directly at both parties. "This has been one of the most troubling cases I've presided over. What makes it troubling is not the legal complexity, but the human cruelty at its center." She picked up the photo album, still in its protective sleeve. Rose Brennan spent her final months documenting what she experienced as theft and betrayal by her own children. The defendants have argued that these documents represent the confused ravings of a demented mind. But the evidence tells a different story. Rose's documentation is specific, accurate, and corroborated by financial records. The amounts she noted match actual transfers. The dates she recorded align with bank statements. The concerns she expressed were validated by attorneys she consulted and medical professionals who evaluated her granddaughter years later. Judge Morrison looked at my parents. Margaret and Donald Carver had legal authority to manage Rose Brennan's finances through power of attorney. But legal authority is not unlimited. It does not permit you to override clearly expressed wishes, to isolate a competent adult from legal counsel, or to use medical diagnoses as weapons against autonomy. The evidence shows you did all of those things. My mother's hand was over her mouth. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. The recording Rose made in January was dismissed by the defense as paranoid delusion. But paranoia is unfounded fear. Rose's fears were not unfounded, they were documented, detailed, and ultimately proven accurate. A person who correctly identifies that they're being stolen from and takes steps to preserve evidence is not delusional. They're defending themselves the only way they can. Judge Morrison turned to me. "Elena Jones has been characterized by the defense as unstable, opportunistic, and motivated by greed. Yet she turned down a substantial settlement offer. She pursued this case despite knowing her own psychiatric history would be weaponized against her. She did this not because she's delusional, but because she made a promise to her grandmother to tell the truth. That takes courage, not delusion. Rebecca squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. Based on the totality of evidence presented, I find that Rose Brennan's final will, the one leaving her estate to Elena Jones, was executed while Rose had testamentary capacity. I find that the defendants systematically undermined Rose's autonomy, misused their power of attorney authority, and engaged in a pattern of financial control that rose to the level of elder abuse. I find that the will's disappearance from Hendricks and Associates was not coincidental, and that the defendants bear responsibility for that disappearance. Judge Morrison's gavel came down. I am therefore ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Rose Brennan's estate, in its entirety, passes to Elena Marie Jones, as specified in the authenticated will dated January 21st. The defendants are ordered to provide a full accounting of all transactions made under power of attorney, and any amounts that cannot be justified as legitimate expenses for Rose's care are to be returned to the estate with interest. Court costs and attorney's fees are assessed against the defendants. The gavel came down again, final and absolute. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Rebecca pulled me into a hug, whispering, "We did it. We did it," over and over. Dorothy Chen was crying in the gallery, and Reverend Chen had his arm around her shoulders. Across the aisle, my parents sat frozen. Patricia was already packing her briefcase, her professional composure shattered. My father's face had gone from red to an ashy pale. My mother just stared at the judge's bench like she couldn't process what had just happened. Tyler approached me cautiously. "Lainey, I'm glad Grandma's wishes are being honored. I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner." I looked at my brother, the one family member left who might still become someone I could have a relationship with someday. "Thank you for not testifying against me. That mattered. They're not going to forgive this. You know that, right? Mom and Dad, they're going to see this as a betrayal, not as justice." "I know, but I didn't do this for their forgiveness. I did it for Grandma Rose. And for myself." As we left the courtroom, I passed my parents in the hallway. My mother looked at me with an expression of such venom that I actually flinched. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed. "I hope you're proud of yourself." "I didn't destroy anything," I said quietly. "I just refuse to let you rebuild it on lies." Rebecca pulled me away before either of them could respond. Outside the courthouse, the November air was cold and sharp, and I could finally breathe, properly for the first time in months. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now they have 30 days to provide the accounting Judge Morrison ordered. If they can't justify the transfers, they'll have to pay it back. We'll probably have to go through probate to actually settle the estate, but with Morrison's ruling, that should be straightforward. Elena, you won. Not just the case, you won the right to tell the truth and have it believed." 3 months later, I sat in the house that had been my grandmother's, the house that was now mine. The estate had finally cleared probate. My parents had been forced to return over $200,000 they couldn't justify as legitimate care expenses. They'd filed an appeal, but their attorney had advised them it was unlikely to succeed given Judge Morrison's detailed findings. I'd spent the first week just walking through the rooms, remembering Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and all the times Grandma Rose had told me I was capable of more than I believed. Her furniture was still here, her books, her photo albums, the real ones, filled with memories instead of evidence. In her bedroom closet, I found one more thing she'd left for me, a small box with my name on it, hidden behind her winter coats. Inside was a letter dated 3 days before she died, written in handwriting so shaky it was almost illegible. "My darling Elena, if you're reading this, it means you fought for the truth and won. I knew you would. You have your grandfather's stubbornness and my sense of justice. Don't feel guilty about what this cost you with your parents. Some relationships are only worth maintaining if they're built on honesty, and they stopped being honest with you years ago. Build the life you deserve. Love freely. Trust yourself. And remember that I loved you enough to make sure you'd be okay even after I was gone. You were always my favorite, and I'm not sorry for that. All my love, Forever. Grandma rose. I sat on her bed and cried for an hour. Not sad tears. Not really. Relief, maybe. Grief. Gratitude. All of it mixed together. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Asterisk. Estate check cleared. You're officially solvent. What are you going to do first? Asterisk. I looked around the house, my house, and thought about all the charity checks Grandma Rose had tried to write before my parents stopped her. The library fund, the women's shelter, the church food pantry. Asterisk. First? Asterisk. I texted back. Asterisk. I'm making some donations. Grandma had a list. Asterisk. Then I was going to live. Really live, without fear or manipulation or the constant weight of being told I wasn't enough. I was going to figure out who Elena Jones actually was when she wasn't being controlled or diminished or made to feel small. And I was going to do it in the house that love built, the kind of love that protects and empowers instead of controlling and diminishing. The kind of love my grandmother had shown me, even from beyond the grave. The kind of love that, in the end, had been worth fighting for. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.